welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell.
Good morning, Rose here. As we have all been watching the devastating effects of the bushfires in Australia, I have connected with a number of women there that are writers and veterinarians. You heard us speak with Gundi earlier, who can give us updates on what is happening on the front lines. And I'd like to introduce you to Elizabeth Walton. She's a writer-photographer who posted this diary this week of her evacuation from Eurobodallan. With her permission, I'm going to just read you what she has to say. We are on the far south coast of New South Wales in a small beach town north of Cobargo called Mystery Bay. We awoke Tuesday morning, like everyone else, to black skies at dawn amidst a flaming genetitis, a pyrocumulus that was, I am certain, as terrifying as hearing an incendiary bomb launching overhead. We left by car. We brought our degrees, our computers, a book I am writing, a change of clothes, a flimsy esky bag, and a bit of food. Later the next day, when we were allowed to travel home for a short time, we brought sturdier eskies, a fold-up table, 2 plastic chairs, water bottles, and, as it was my birthday, a bottle of champagne. We cut the sunflowers from the garden on the way out of the gate. The kind of storm overhead at dawn on New Year's Eve usually precedes the immediate fire front. Surrounded by National Park, we grabbed the things we had packed the night before and left. For all the technology that humans have created to generate predictions of weather patterns, there was no threat that fires would reach us when we went to bed. The power was out at the evacuation center. We attended a public meeting, then walked to the chemist's shop, whose staff were working by candlelight, making a list of anyone who didn't have cash to pay for urgent medications that had been left behind. Just pay us later, they said, before taking a load of nappies down to the evacuation center. Later on day 3, or perhaps it was day 4, of camping, various outdoors and in our cars at the evacuation center, a fire captain returned from the field to address the crowd. He said he was frightened. He said that he had visited the fire front on Monday, the 30th of December, and in his experience, informed opinion, the fires would not reach the coast for 3 days. They reached the coast, in his words, in less than 3 hours. This he told us at a fire briefing at the Narooma Evacuation Center, where the people in charge received updates on the emergency by queuing up to use a payphone. For many days, people attending the twice-daily briefings asked, "Where are the fires now? Are towns burned?" "We don't know," was the recurring response from the fire captains and those in charge. The camp was quickly populated from New Year's Eve with 4,000 registered people who spilled out onto the floors of the local golf club, the sports club, the surf club, and the like. Most of them camped in their cars outside and used the facilities as needed. From shows of hands at the meetings, there was an estimated additional 1,000 people who had not registered. They had dogs, they had chickens, they even had a goat, cats in cars, ponies being walked along the forefront of the beach. The vet, evacuated with all of his equipment, spent most of his time sedating the cats. There was a doctor, a pharmacist, and eventually a generator to keep lights on overnight. A queue for line at the local fishing trawler lasted well into the wee hours. We attended 4 times before we were able to get a watery bag, which you could get if you had $10 in hand. The golf club fed the entire crowd one night on 2-minute noodles. The official evacuation center had a couple of Rotary and Lions vans that cooked and distributed food to the hordes. All remained calm until one lady asked where the vegan queue was, and the lady in the van said, "This is an emergency. There is no vegan option. It is good that we are all going through this so we can understand what refugees are living through for years on end." There was no more talk of vegan food. By day 5, the Rotarians had left, and a paper roster set up for volunteers who made egg sandwiches on the barbecue after food generously donated by local businesses had long been used. Dinner on New Year's Eve was a welcome piece of overcooked pork on a paper napkin, eaten in the swirling pitch-black darkness that we had forgotten was only 5 p.m. The first night we slept in the car, as did mostly everyone else, on a space that is usually an off-leash dog park. Some slept inside the hall on pieces of foam alongside their dogs. At the stroke of midnight, there was a faint Happy New Year from a few of the 5,000 people present. It had been pitch black since the afternoon. They were mostly too sober and too exhausted to care. There were 3 toilets and 2 hand basins to service women, presumably 2,500 of them, who all waited patiently in queues snaking out the door. In the early days, no one used the 3 showers. St. John's ambulance volunteers assisted people with breathing difficulties and dressed open wounds. A 6 months pregnant woman in tears presented with diarrhea that was seemed to be spreading through the camp on day 2. There was no power, no internet, no phone reception, and one pay phone that even the emergency services were relying on for vital communications with the head office in Sydney. They all did a remarkable job around the clock in incredibly strained circumstances. A family set up their caravan next to us. They had moved to the coast from Canberra just 4 days earlier. They had come to the evacuation center just after a briefing of the sprawling rural hamlet of Tilba, where they were told their homes would not be there at the end of the weekend. We were all told our homes would not be there by the end of the weekend. Something inside of me broke on hearing this news. I had used my remaining petrol and phone charge to drive to a place where I had reception and phoned 2GB, the radio station that the Australian politicians listen to, or tend to listen to. I told them there were a total of 85 people deployed on far south coast fires and just 17 appliances, and that we had all been told our towns would be wiped out over the weekend. I told them about the paucity of support with an aging volunteer firefighting crew who announced to the public that they had no more fight in them. I said, "We need help." Live on air, in these circumstances, the announcer told me that it was unrealistic to expect a fire truck in every driveway. In response, I said, live on air, that the Victorian government had asked for and received additional support from the federal government. The NSW, New South Wales, state government, at that time were still saying they had all the support they needed. But that afternoon, things began to change. The government held a meeting on Thursday and agreed to deploy the Army reserves to clear the roads, amongst other tasks. The New South Wales police phoned all staff, including those on leave, and asked who would volunteer to come in to our rescue. Almost all police said, "We will." They were here before the end of the weekend. We were told this by the officers who came. I wanted to give them hugs to say thanks, but felt fearful of engulfing them with a sea of swallowed emotion. Council spent Friday cutting all vegetation from around the evacuation center at Narooma. By this time, much work had been done to get the roads open during the short window between the firestorms. The flotsam and jetsam of interstate summer tourists in their towed wagons had largely moved on. The Airbnbers had given up trying to find their hosts and left town, and the evacuation center had swelled again into the ranks of local townships. People who felt inconvenienced to be in the situation for one night, ignoring the filthy people around them, who by this stage had been camped here in the open for the 5th day, with nothing but the ocean to cleanse themselves. As the newbies flooded in, wearing their very best evacuation chic of long flowing caftans and heirloom jewels, they questioned why the rest of us were wearing masks. They questioned why we had scarves around our faces. They didn't know yet about the blackness that would run from their noses the next time they showered. We spent the next Firefront day, Saturday, preparing, as we were told to get ready to jump into the ocean. The fires were predicted to impact from the north in the morning and the south in the afternoon. We found a bag that zipped up, and we wrapped our medications in plastic several times. We wrapped the car keys in another. We wrapped our IDs and credit cards, rationalized in one wallet, into yet another, all tied in neat little bundles, zipped inside the bag that slid over the shoulder, which we strapped on and walked around with, and a woolen blanket tied to the top to use in the water. We checked high tide. We checked low. We matched that to the times of the fire front prediction. We found a boogie board abandoned by the garbage bins by a tourist and went down to the beach the day before to teach our dog to swim. The sea was a bob with floating gas tanks dotted around the lake in case they exploded. But on this day, all structures had to be packed away. We were then, for fire impact day number 2, left to stand around in the dog park behind our cars. We walked to the beachfront and stood on the balcony of the abandoned holiday houses as the skies darkened shortly after noon. 2 men on golf carts came to tell us we were trespassing. When we asked where the private property ended and the public land, the beach began, they wouldn't say. They definitely were not prepared to allow us to stand in the shade of the enormous pine trees standing in front of the water that their visitors shade under on their summer vacations. So we stood in what was left of the sun. By 2 p.m., the skies were red with a hot wind from the west. By 6 p.m., the power was out. It was raining cinders, and the skies were darker than midnight. The heavens were buckling once more with storms, and the winds had returned to swirling from all directions, as they had the morning we arrived. The elderly evacuated from their aged care facility, nestled together in a silent mass inside the sports center, sitting quietly, their names pinned to them. The St. John's tent set up inside on a dais that overlooked the mayhem. Everyone did their best just to stay calm. At 3 a.m., I helped a man who I could just make out in the darkness, who had fallen down beside his car. We couldn't sleep outside with no structure above, so I planned to get into the car with the dog. And in the chaos, 2 friends found us in the dark, getting into a bit of a tiz. They had a key to an empty caravan with just enough room on the floor for my partner to sleep, and our meltdown over where to sleep was over. My dog was so hot she panicked at having to get back into the car yet again. I spent the night inside the back of the car in the dark, sponging her down and fanning her with a wet tea towel. In the morning, we went home. There was no power, no phone, no mobile, no radio reception, no way of being contacted if the fires at Dingham's Creek flared. The birds had gone. There weren't even any mosquitoes. I had thrown away the sunflowers I took to the evacuation camp that the bees in town were using for food. There were 100 people on the beach at Mystery Bay who used tractors to dig trenches to jump in if the fires arrived. By the afternoon, when the skies went red again, day 6, we drove past on our way back to the evacuation center, and the high tide had claimed those trenches, and the tractors were nowhere to be seen, presumably backed into the back of trucks that brought them here and parked in their nearby homes. When we arrived back at the evacuation center, the power was out, the phones were down, and though the skies were once more the familiar orange ochre hue, we could not face another night out in the open. Something inside of us both snapped. We panicked and decided to immediately leave the region. Immediately, as if in right now, at high speed if necessary. We spoke with the authorities and 4 police officers wandering around. They thought it was probably a good idea. And just as we were leaving, the power flicked back on. So we decided to come home to spend the night, making a proper plan to leave in the calm light of another smoke-filled day. Luckily, we had a car charger for the nebulizer I rely on to regulate asthma. The same officers were at the turnoff to our beach by the time we got home and agreed we should stay home, not face a journey into the unknown at that hour, which, although only 3 p.m., was again very dark. At home, we argued as the tensions unwound and found their natural spark. By noon the next day, day 7, the internet had returned, and we had 6 millimeters of rain, and we felt safe to stay home until we braced for the next front, which is due in a few short days. We didn't unpack a thing. Our region was heavily backburned in autumn. It is too late to do it in these winter days. The fires will come too soon, too early when the ground is still cold. They call it backburning, though in reality it is mostly industrial cleanup. This region is surrounded by state forests, aka government logging lands. After the government-owned corporations cut the trees, they burn the land to get rid of the debris. When the state forests are logged, 75% of the tree cut down is left on the forest floor, as it is of no use to the loggers, who take most of the trees to the Eden chip mill to export overseas. The chip mill has 2 mountains of wood chips that are now on fire. The New South Wales government was due to announce the sale of the softwood division of its state forest assets on New Year's Day. This is the government that went to the contentious March 2019 election with a promise of no further asset sales. Communities have great concerns about the privatization of the state forests that line the east coast of Australia, and what this will mean for future fire management in a coastal area that is swamped by smoke from fires all autumn from, quote, fire management, unquote, and all summer from wildfires. Many of the fires that have swept through New South Wales since September have escaped from Forest Corporation attempts to protect their assets, such as the fires at Clouds Creek on the state's north. When Scott Morrison returned from Hawaii or Honolulu or wherever it was that he went before deciding to come back to Australia and have a go at being a leader, he announced with a certain glint in his eye that there would be need to be reform of land management in Australia. What he meant, and has now announced, is that he wants to introduce legislation enforcing backburning or hazard reduction, or reduction of the, quote, fuel load of national parks and state forests and possibly on private held land as well. The New South Wales state government heavily hazard reduction burned around the Blue Mountains in the last year. Despite this, more forest than ever has burned this year. The same thing happened in the previous period when a higher than usual amount of hazard reduction burning was done. More forest than ever burned. Last year, we did one of the 3 highest levels of hazard reduction burning in the Blue Mountains on record, and yet we've still seen about 100,000 hectares burn in bushfires in that area, New South Wales Environmentalist Minister Matt Keane said. In comparison, since 2000, the next year saw 100,000 hectares burn. In the words of Wyn Jones, credited with discovering the Welemi pine in remote wilderness northwest of the Blue Mountains along with his colleague David Noble, the only thing that grows back when country burns is fire-dependent species. Ecologists and national park managers of old always knew this. The easiest way to avoid this wisdom is to get rid of the knowledgeable land managers and replace them with a skeleton staff of rubbish removers and barbecue cleaners, which is what most North Park staff seem to be these days. The government has one agenda and only one, led by John Barillo, Deputy Premier of New South Wales. Get rid of the national parks, flatten them into one layer that provides for resource collection, read as mining, logging, and other commercial enterprises. Australia was populated with extensive forests for millennia, without a man with a jerry can standing in front of every tree planning when it was safest to burn. Some parts of Australia undoubtedly were managed by low-intensity cultural burns through the ages, but not all forests and not all lands. Certainly, never the entire country. As humans make their mark further and further on this land, there seems to be little option for nature left. And the people in government today certainly have an agenda to demolish what little is left of our wilderness. The wilderness our wildlife depends on. The wilderness our lungs depend on. The wilderness our oceans depend on to regulate our atmosphere. Yet the human journey into this land is one that now faces a horrendous precedent as we move dangerously close to an era where man wishes to eradicate every last gasp of nature's normal self, and instead replace her with some interminable surface created by man himself, who, he tells himself, he can be sure he can manage as if he were treating the land as his own creation. But I have news for these people. You cannot own nature. Nature owns you. And from what we have seen in recent days, weeks, and months, nature will always have the last say. If the government of Australia responds to this crisis with a knee-jerk reaction and an intention to burn the lot, then we as a nation are in deep trouble. For first we will have the forest, then we will have the incursions into them, treating them as though we could restrain them, burning them and cutting them down to make us, quote, safe, unquote. And then we will have lost a lot. We've had 4 millimeters of rain today. Apparently it is not enough to dampen the fires. When we went back to town to get a few things, there was still a half-hour queue for petrol. There was a packet of spaghetti lost on the wrong shelf, and a single packet of lasagna sheets where the pasta would ordinarily be. There is very little in the way of fresh food. We went back to the evacuation center for bananas. There were not many people there now. Carl from Tilba was handing out the food. He knows everyone has gone home, but the fires are still there, hanging like a Damocles sword that swings from the horizon just at the back of the Galuga mountain. For now, he plans to stay put. The next front is due on Friday, and then we have the ordinary summer threat to get through. I think they've gone home under the illusion that we are all okay, he said, handing us bananas to take home. We have begun calling the emergency assistant lines after half a day we gave up. Despite losing all of our income for the foreseeable future, we are not eligible for anything apart from New Start, and we are reluctant to expose ourselves to a future robo-debt. We are musicians, but for now there are no more gigs. Everything has been canceled. But we don't mind. We prefer it that way. We have no voices left to sing. We have no more words. We are used to connecting people with their emotion, but right now, there is little left to give. For now, we are safe, and the call goes out to those who are still struggling. Friends at Kulagolite who are nursing 200 head of cattle through scorched grounds, nursing 3 little children. We offer them hot showers and a washing machine if they can get out to use it. We offer the bakery volunteer labor to start getting bread back out into the community. They will get back to us tomorrow, though tomorrow sometimes in circumstances like this could be a long way away. In the meantime, we are filling old garbage bins with water to stand around the house as the damp smoke rolls in. If you were able to stay with me through that entire reading of Elizabeth Walton's diary, I'm sure your emotion is running high at this moment. We in America have no idea what this devastation would look like, but Australia offers us a precursor of what our future could look like, will look like, if we're not willing to make the necessary changes for the future ahead. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again soon.
That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me. You see, your mother, she has been suffering, and the truth is told beneath the sea. So raise your voices